Welcome to another Monroe County History Club program. My name is Michael Carter. My wife couldn't make it today, Paulette, but I got a couple of cousins that could make it. There they are over there. So we've been doing this every month for almost 12 years. So it's been fun, presenting and hopefully preserving our local history. We're helped in that endeavor by our friends at the American Legion Post here. Literally no other venue would work for the History Club. We couldn't do this anywhere else. Get the size of the place and the food, and I'm sure we get charged a healthy fee someplace else, but not here. And thanks to the management here, the servers in the kitchen, please be generous with all the servers and be patient as they're serving a pretty large group today, which is, I didn't know what we'd get since it's holiday week, but this is pretty good. And thanks to Cats TV and Dave, our guide's been with us for years back there. We tried to do about 3 programs ourselves when we had COVID, and it turned out okay, but not like these guys. These are pros, and it really is a great finished product. And so many people get to see this that can't make it. They're either working or they live far away, and it's great that they can see programs about the area they came from. Yeah, I'm able to upload these to YouTube just a few days after each program. We have one program that has over 6,000 views on it, and that's the one on the lake we did earlier in the year. And another one has over 3,000, one by Clay Stuckey there, so that ain't bad either. Also, I'm very proud of the relationship we have with the Monroe County History Center. I'm on the board there, and they've supported us every inch of the way, and we also try to help them any way possible. Thanks to places like IU Photo Archives, Monroe County Public Library. As for those YouTube videos, for those who don't know, they're real easy to find. You just go to YouTube and you get in the YouTube search, Monroe County History Club, and they pop right up. Oh, how many new attendees do we have? Do we have some people who haven't been here before? We also have mailing lists for people that aren't on Facebook and whatnot. So if you want the direct mail outs, you can stop by my table and give me your email address, and we can send it to you each month. First of all, Glenda Murray wants to say a couple of words. She's a former presenter here, just, was that last month or last month, wasn't it? Time flies.
Thank you. I have a question to see if anybody can help me. I'm searching for information about the tuberculosis summer camp for kids in 1936. I have access to about 2 minutes of home movies, but I know very little about it, and I have one newspaper article. So if any of you know anything else about a summer TV camp, I would really appreciate any help you can give me. And it's Glenda Murray, and I'll be happy to talk to you afterward. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Glenda. Also, I'm supposed to announce that this Friday is the canopy lights, right? And the History Center is going to be holding an open house beginning at 4 p.m. I got that right. Okay, that's good. Oh, 5. Well, I was close. This many, right? Yeah.
A drive-through light show. Here you go. At the Monroe County Fairgrounds, I think starting Friday night, they're having a drive-through light show with Christmas lights that I think is $20 a carload or something like that.
All right, thanks, Bob. We have a bunch of our old class of 64 people there at one table. I don't think we're not accepted anywhere. And there's some more scattered out there too. Carol Snell, Roger Watkins, a whole bunch of people. So I put some papers on each of the tables about what's coming up next. I won't go through all of them, but one of the things I wanted to do when I helped start this thing was to do programs on each county school, if I could, high school, and each county little burg, small towns throughout the county. And it looks like we're going to get that done. We did the history of old BHS a couple of years ago, last year maybe, and then we did UHS 2 months ago. Those were well attended, of course, so that leaves a few more places. We're going to knock one off today, Smithville, and and then next year, sometime next year, we're going to do one on Ellisville and Steinsville together, because they're kind of joined at the hip anyway. So a guy's going to do something on that. And I just talked to someone last month, and he thinks he's got somebody rounded up to do Unionville, maybe sometime next month, and that'll wrap up the county. Then we can just quit, right? So that's it. But today we have Rozzie Gerstman, and she's going to give us a program on mostly Smithville, everything about Smithville, and everything that surrounds Smithville. And so I'll have her step up, and she'll get started on that.
I'm going to have to see the screen. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Wait. Okay. Give me a minute here. I got to calm down. I've been having a good time over here talking to Smithville people. So first, well, let me back up. Has anybody been to Smithville? You know where Smithville is? Okay. So my topic is Indians, Pioneers, Limestone / Railroad, Skibos and Lake Monroe. And I've already had one question about what is a Skibo. You'll find out. Can you all hear me? Okay. Pardon me? Just a little more. There you go. So if you've been to Smithville, there's this beautiful, some people call it the War Memorial. We'll talk about this a little later. I call it the welcome sign. But it's in the heart of our little sweet. So first of all, I want to thank Mike for inviting me. This has been so much fun to do this, and I've actually been researching Smithville for about 6 years. And so I really dug in hard this past year, and I have found so much more. Even at 10 o'clock last night, I found some interesting stuff. And thanks for Martha Fox. She's helped me with the pictures on here. We took pictures. A lot of the pictures you're going to see today are out of our museum. And thanks to Kurt, Sylvester, and Joe for traveling all the way from Fort Wayne and Martinsville to be here today. You heard Kurt last June. He talked about genealogy of a lot of people in Smithville. They're both SHS graduates. We appreciate that. And thank you for everybody who's from Smithville that's joined us today. I appreciate that. And thank you all for attending. And I hope you will find this enjoyable and not boring. So, who am I? My name is Rosalind Jane McCammon Gerstman. I was born in Smithville, actually at Bloomington Hospital, but I say I was born in Smithville. I'm a graduate of Smithville High School. I attended 1 through 12 grades. Only one branch of my family was not born in the Smithville area. Great uncles, aunts, cousins, parents, siblings, we were all graduates of Smithville High School. Most of my relatives are buried in either the Smithville Christian Church, Mount Elbo, Lucas, or Clear Creek, and the branch that did not go to Smithville, and I have a story to tell about those, they ended up in Smithville. They're buried in Kokomo. So we're going to talk about limestone a little bit, but I felt like giving you this background. When we get there, you'll wonder why I talk about some things like I talk. So grandfathers, including my great-grandfathers and uncles, worked in the limestone mills and the quarries. One uncle was killed in the stone mill. One step-grandfather lost his right arm. I had a cousin recently who died in a stone mill. And my great paternal grandfather was burned very badly in a quarry. And we have someone here from Smithville who lost their father at the quarry. He was electrocuted. So my oral history is rare. I don't have much oral history, which I find odd, because my parents didn't talk much about the history of Smithville. They talked about Smithville School. And I got to thinking about that recently, and it's because when I came along, they'd only been out of school 15 years ago. And so that was still fresh in their memory and the people they went to school with. So my history came out of the books. I've got them here. I won't go through every one. But I also found a lot of writings from my mother, who is Imogene Hill McCammon Glass. She was the historian for Smithville in the 90s. And so I have relied heavily on her. And then my sister, Linda McCammon, came along and did a lot. So I've dug up a lot of stuff, plus old newspapers and everything. And I want to say up front, if I am incorrect on anything, please come up and tell me. I want to correct this. So what you're going to see is I have found that when I started typing this up, that I was tired of always digging around trying to find what I know I had, but I couldn't. So what I've decided to do, I'm putting this into a binder, and it will be placed in the museum that we can all add to. And I really would like families to help me add to this book. So then we can always go to the book to pull out information. So we are in the Clear Creek Township. And if you look at their website, they say we are the busiest little township in Indiana. And it was created in 1818. We've had many different trustees. I couldn't find who was our first trustee, but if I recall correctly, there was a Mr. Storm, and it said he oversaw the township when it was formed. Our current trustee is Thelma Kelly Jeffries. She was elected in 1990-91, and she's also an SHS graduate. And Thelma has had tons of accomplishments since 1990, tons. And I created a binder for her last year, and I had to use one of the big ones where I found pictures that my mother had that, and I went around the museum and pulling things together. And it's wonderful. One of the biggest things she did early on is Dr. Frank Rismos had bought up a lot of property in Smithville, and he donated it to the Clear Creek Township. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then one of the big things, and Sharon Waterford, who is with us, and she was part of all this back in the 90s, she won a battle with Monon where the war memorial sits, and even got a settlement out of it. So this is one of the biggest things we had, because we didn't want it to stop the renaissance that was happening in Smithville. So I won't go through anything, but the lady over on your left, that's Thelma, and the lady in the white is my mother. And this is, and we'll talk some more about this later, Smithville never won a sectional. They tried. They lost by 1 point many times. But in 95 and 96, the old timers got together and they won both sectionals. I love this picture. Was it a big crowd? You were the biggest crowd, Smithville was, okay. Clear Creek, this is more highlights of what Thelma has done. And so state of Indiana was established in 1816, Monroe County in 1818, and the township for Clear Creek was established in 1818. So the following little towns are what's involved in Clear Creek. Harrodsburg, Smithville, Fairfax, Lake Monroe, Mount Abel, Victor, and Ketcham Settlement. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Sanders today because they're Smithville's sister, but they're in a different township. So this is a map of the township, and I just read that Monroe County, that Lake Monroe takes up a fourth now of Clear Creek Township. That's a lot. And I put this map up to show some, I think this was 1856. It shows you some of the landowners. We've got Jacob Deckard, Woodward, Solomon Lucas, William Leonard. We have several cemeteries that Clear Creek Township oversees, and these are the ones. And several of them are not up here because they're private, or we just didn't name them because they were underwater. And my Uncle Lou helped move a lot of those monuments, and I'll talk about Lou later. So this is an old picture of downtown Smithville, probably since the railroad tracks are there in the front of the screen, it has to be after 1850. And I think on the back of this picture it says this is a political rally. So highlights of Clear Creek Township. 1885, we had the first train robbery. And I've seen different articles that said $13,000 was taken versus $1,200, so I don't know which one's right. First settler to Clear Creek Township was David McCollin. First school bus was manufactured in Smithville, downtown, by Ralph Carpenter, who has the Carpenter bus. And it was called the Rickenbach bus, with no floorboard near the driver. I read that he wanted to enlarge the factory, and the townspeople said no, so he moved to Mitchell. Monroe County Hall of Fame, we have 3, except I'd like someone to help me here because I can't find them. I know for sure Colonel John Ketcham is a Hall of Famer, and Dr. George Luther Mitchell is a Hall of Famer, and Carl Stewart is a Hall of Famer. But I found where Merle Hill, who's my great uncle, was, but for his contributions with Little League, Babe Ruth, Little League. But I couldn't find his name, so if someone could help me there. Monroe County Fair and Indiana State Fair Queen in the summer of 1971, Jackie Fowler Walsh, who is a graduate of the last class of Smithville. Nick Cheeseman, who died in 2007, I think. He was an Air Force pilot, and he was part of the U.S. presidential air, which I'm going to talk about him shortly here. We had the first grade schools, 1 through 8. The first one was established in Smithville in 1822 in a vacant log cabin. Smithville resident John B. Crafton was lost on the Titanic. And do you know the name John Crafton? Do you know the name John Crafton? Yep, okay. Yes, Rose Hill, yeah. Some more. Bartlett Woodward became the first Monroe County Commissioner. Colonel John Ketcham became the first trustees of Indiana University in 1820-21, and we'll talk more about Colonel Ketcham. There was a possible Indian battle with the Kentucky Rangers on Cedar Bluff, and I'll talk more about that. Trustee oversees 29 cemeteries. Smithville area is surrounded by Keokuk limestone, did I pronounce that right? And the St. Louis limestone. And then there's some big words here that I can't pronounce. And what my mother said was they're mutton heads. So there you go. So there's Jackie Fowler when she won State Fair Queen. Fairfax. Fairfax, does anybody know where the Fairfax Beach is? Okay, were you ever there before the lake went in? Yes. Martha was born in Fairfax. So Fairfax was started in an early date, 1830, but has always been a village. So there's a lot of stories here. And so Scarborough and Wilson opened a merchandise store there in 1838, and they were doing a good business. And then it started changing hands up until the 1850s. They had a large furniture manufacturing in the 1840s and 50s, and then it's underwater. And I also read where they might be the first rafters to sell their goods on the waterways, on Salt Creek and Sugar Creek. So in the museum, Julia Deckard, my 4th grade teacher, helped with the museum in her later years, and she put together a lot of this information because she was born down in that area. So you have the dam right here, and then she's put another a view of the lake up here on a map. And Chapel Hill is also, we had a lot of students. If you would go through the Fairfax Old Cover Bridge and turn left, you would get into Chapel Hill, correct? Yep. Okay. Oh, this head, Stonehead, what that story is about is somewhere over in Brown County is this Stonehead, and it shows Fairfax pointing a certain way. So it's near Story. Okay. And so it's pretty interesting that Fairfax at that time was well known. Harrodsburg. Harrodsburg was first named New Jane, and it was after Mr. Buchanan's wife, Jane. It says a pleasant little place of clever people and live businessmen. This little town, I was told when I was a kid that Harrodsburg rivaled Bloomington with the way their growth was happening so fast with manufacturing, and then there was a fire. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I was always told. So Mr. Alexander helped plot out Harrodsburg, and then a Levi Sugart, and I can't find either one. He added more plats to the town and changed it to Harrodsburg after his hometown of Harrodsburg, Kentucky. In 1853, the New Albany-Salem Railroad was construction the same time that it came through Smithville. And so it brought all of us together. Let's see. And then in 1860s, there was a packing house built by Carmichael and Ermey, and they employed 40 people. And they shipped thousands of hogs each year, which were packed on flatboats. And there is a storybook, and I think I found it, by Ruth Seeley Heath, who several years ago wrote the glory years of her years of glory. Excuse me. Let's see. And the oldest house in town is located on Gore Road. And my understanding, it's still there, and it is based on a log core. So they've kept the log part in the inner part of their house and built around it, which I am finding a lot of people did back then. So Harrodsburg, this is the Monon. We call it the Monon, but it didn't come the Monon for a long time after the New Albany. And I'm going to talk about this Smithville Hill here shortly. So then the Ketcham Settlement. So Colonel Ketcham is written about quite a bit. There's a lot of information. There's a book that I got, and I got it from the Monroe County Library history thing. And it's by Pap somebody, I can't remember the name, and I couldn't find it the other day to include it. Anyway, he always said that it is true the first settler was David McColland. And he and his wife moved to Clear Creek Township and stayed for a while and then moved to Benton Township, which is where he's supposed to be buried, but I can't find that. Mr. Colonel Ketcham grew up in Shelby County, Kentucky, and before he moved here around 1818, he had tried a time before, but the Indian there were Indian fighting going on, so he didn't want his family involved, so he moved back home. But he himself was an Indian fighter. So there is so much information on him, and there are still descendants of Colonel Ketcham. We from Smithville, well, they all graduated from Smithville, the descendants. And my dad worked on one of the children's farm when he was a teenager, and he loved them. And I also found that Colonel Ketcham, for the 1836 presidential election, he was an elector for Andrew Jackson. And he was also in the Indiana House of Representatives. And I don't know if Glenda talked about this last month, but Colonel Ketcham, Bartlett Woodward, and Thomas Grimes were part of the of establishing Monroe County. And so I find that wonderful that 3 people from Smithville, I think there's some more that got to be involved in that from Smithville. Let's see. Colonel Ketcham was with the colonel of the 20th Regiment of the Indiana State Militia. There's so much information about him. And he has his own cemetery, which people are still buried there on Ketcham Road. And this is his mill, and I'm told that it's still there. And this is a family that became very populated, marrying into different families in their area. And this is his tombstone. And this is the Ketcham depot, but I read the other day that Austin Ketcham wanted it at his property, but then I also read where Colonel Ketcham used this depot, so I'm not sure. And this monument is not in Indiana. This plaque, this is in Jackson County. So they call him a fearless pioneer, ranger, surveyor, public servant who dedicated this public square for seat of government of Jackson County, Indiana. And that was when Brownstown was founded in 1816. So Sanders was established in 1892. Original name was going to be Limestone. They changed it to Sanders for a Tennessean, Newell Sanders, who owned a lot of the property in Sanders. And in 1892, Mr. Sanders became a U.S. Senator from Tennessee. Limestone quarries were discovered in Sanders probably about the same time as Smithville. And there was a group of Italians who immigrated here to work in the stone company. Oh, I forgot to do something. I'm not sure when Sanders School, Lois, do you know when Sanders School was established? Yeah. And when did it close? Okay. Probably about the same time Smithville did. Sanders had two or three groceries, and I remember them, especially the Mercer grocery store, the White grocery store, and my great-grandparents, Lawrence and Mary Ellen Deckard McCammon, lived right in the heart of Sanders. And so my dad grew up in Sanders. Sanders was on the railroad stop, and I have a story to tell, but I don't know whether to tell it. And Gwen Hayes was a graduate of Smithville and played basketball for Smithville. So the story is, I'll tell it anyway. I hope I don't offend anybody. So when the train was going through, this young gentleman got on, and the conductor said, the kid was really bothered about something. And the conductor says, "Where are you going?" He goes, "To hell." And he said, "Well, I'll let you off in Sanders." Lois is laughing. She's not offended. So in our museum, we're trying to bring in Harrodsburg and Smithville too, just to make us all feel one big family, which we are. And that's the story about Sanders being Limestone. And this is Gwen Hayes. He was the principal of Sanders for years and a teacher. Such a well thought of gentleman. And this is a story of when he retired, and we have it in the museum. And different people of his previous students wrote in nice things about him. And I do believe my cousin Jim went to Sanders, right? Jim? Yes. Georgiana, did you go to Sanders? You didn't go to Sanders. Okay, where is Smithville? It's south of Bloomington on Fairfax Road and Strain Ridge. You'll pass through Sanders on your way if you go on Fairfax. You can get to Harrodsburg from there. But if you go east or southeast, you're going to run right into the water. So Smithville itself was started, although I believe there were people already living in the area, when the New Albany-Chicago Railroad was established in 52-53. I have a lot here, so I'm trying to hurry. So Mansfield Bennett and George Smith laid out on each side of the railroad track 38 plats. And so they got sold out pretty quick, and they went for $15 a lot. And I looked up every name that I saw who owned a plot, and I didn't even recognize the people. And so I think people came in and bought it up and resold it. So George Smith, we know, was a blacksmith, and probably had one of the first stores there. And so stores started popping up because they were helping the workers on the railroad to supply their needs for whatever. And by the 1850, they say that about 15 families then comprised of the population of Smithville. And this is what some of the buildings look like in Smithville. Nothing but fire hazards. And they did have fire hazards. But you can see, like maybe in this picture too, look how close the railroad was to that business. So there's a little town. It's not in our township, but it's so close to us, and it's near where Colonel Ketcham is the home of Victor Olytic Stone Company. And it was put into existence in 1898, and it's located near Victor and Harrodsburg on the Clear Creek. And it was chosen by John Ketcham, Colonel John Ketcham, for his home in Grist Mill. And I have a picture, I think. And in this area is a cemetery called the Wright Cemetery. And there was a family named Cooch, K-U-T-C-H, that came here as settlers. So I found this as fascinating. This is Abraham Lincoln's first school teacher, second school teacher. He's buried there in Victor. And so this plaque talks about being Lincoln's second school teacher. This is, I don't know what you call this thing. Thank you. Words just failed me. This is in Victor, and the next one says, elevated road which teamsters used to haul stone from Mills to Ketcham's depot to Austin Ketcham, described as a fearful job. Let's go back and look how tall that thing is. So this is a map of the Indian treaties. So why Smithville? So help me out here. So why did the Miami and Delaware tribes settle in Monroe County and in Clear Creek Township? Why did the settlers settle in Smithville, Harrodsburg, Fairfax, Victor, or Monroe County? Why did they come here? How did they travel here? I have so many questions. I have some assumptions, but not sure if they're true. How did they learn of this area? I don't know for sure why early settlers came here. Some say it was the farmland, but then I hear recently it's the most horrible farmland. Some say it was the abundance of water. That's true. Was their intent to settle temporarily at the best location they found, or did they just want to move on further west? Limestone and railroad did not exist in 1818 and would not for another 50 years. I know several received land grants if they were soldiers in the American Revolution or War of 1812. And I do have a deed of one where my parents live, where it was given by the U.S. government. And it was pretty interesting read. And it actually says from U.S. government to Henry Burkhart. And that was 1816, I think. So they had to know there were Indians here. Colonel John, like I said, Colonel Ketcham migrated, tried to come here twice and turned around and went back one. So what brought them here? Was it the beauty of the untouched land, the vast forests? They just came across gorgeous terrain, many from the Shenandoah Valley, Wythe County, Virginia, for one, or from the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, or the rolling hills of Kentucky. Why here? I don't know. But my heart tells me I love Smithville. And as I was doing all this research, I just fell in love again with my hometown. There's a group of us who are, Sharon's here, Pat Clark, Lyndon Bob Pittman, Patty Robertson, and currently Lois Ridge Hendricks has joined us, and Janie Shields once in a while, Five Coat once in a while joins us. And we're just trying to bring all these answers together. Based on this work I've just said, I've fallen in love with my hometown. I have become acquainted with the Indians and the settlers that stopped in Clear Creek Township. They moved on to the west, or they decided to settle among the rolling hills. The fun part of gathering this is I feel like I've known them since 1818. I feel like I was there with them. So I just took a picture off of a book I have on the Miami Indians just to give us a picture. I wish we did have pictures. So in the one-room schoolhouse book, and I didn't bring it, there's a note in there about my grandmother. Grace Burnworth Hill taught at Chapel Hill. And one of the students wrote in and said she remembers that Mrs. Hill asked the fourth grade class to memorize this poem. We're assuming she wrote this because she wrote poetry all the time. So the poem goes this way. Where I walked to school each day, Indian children used to play. Wigwams set up on the ground. At night, bears prowled around. What a different place today where we live and work and play. And we know the Miamis were here and that they allowed the Delaware, Shawnee, and Wyandottes, and Kickapoos, and some more during hunting season. So, here's another one, Curtis. There was supposedly a battle in Cedar Bluff off of Ketcham Road in 1811. 1811. We didn't become a township until 1818. And there are some names in here that I know, so you tell me. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And this was found in the Decker genealogy, and it was supposed to be in a book called The Frontiersman, but I bought it and I can't find it. But I find it interesting that the names of the people they're putting in the story had not arrived to Smithville yet. But if they were part of the Kentucky Rangers out of Fort Ritter, which is in Bedford, maybe they decided they liked it here and moved here. I don't know. So there was a tremendous a battle. And so David McColland, the first settler, had a friend, and he was a Delaware chief. And his name was John, and Major Grogan was a major individual during this time, and he married the niece of George Rogers Clark. I think I'm right on that. And so our friend, the Delaware chief, and here's a list of the people who were part of this battle. Now, I already mentioned Bartlett Woodward, David McCollin, John Rosenia was the Delaware chief. And some of these other names sounded very familiar. Thomas Grimes, you're going to hear about here shortly. So there's a picture of where this battle was supposed to have taken place. I think if you look, it's way up on a bluff, and then down here is the Clear Creek. So I won't go into it, but it was not a pretty sight. But I don't know if it took place or not. So we have a picture in the museum of Julia Deckard, our fourth grade teacher, who she and her classmates went to this place and sat and looked at it. So did she believe it? I don't know. So what do y'all think? It's a long story. Okay, so our pioneers. So it shows here where they migrated from. So one of my relatives came from New York and ended up in Laurel, Indiana, and Wabash, Indiana. Most of my family, I have a young family, which was my grandmother on my dad's side, came from Wythe County, Virginia, which Curtis talked about in June. And it shows where they came through Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee to migrate in Indiana. So we talked about David McCollin being the first settler. There's a story about him that his wife says, and I think this is funny, that she said she made the best corn pone in the area. There's nobody else there except them. Bartlett Woodward moved to Smithville in 1816 and entered a large amount of government land. His property was just right where Smithville School, just a little bit to the south of it. His son is the one who gave the land to the township for Smithville to build. He and his family lived in a log cabin for a while, and he was a prominent citizen in Monroe County. Then there's Colonel Ketcham that I talked about. He built a grist mill along Clear Creek, and I have to laugh at myself on this because I thought the Clear Creek I know doesn't have much water in it. And so I did find where it said you cannot have a grist mill until it floods, or that you want to use a raft so everything's going to have to be with high water. And then the grist mills, there were other people who had in the area, a Mr. Taylor, a Mr. Shirley, a Mr. Green, a Mr. Jacobs. They were all flatboating products down to New Orleans. Other early entries, I just mentioned Henry Burkhart. He got his for being a soldier in the War of 1812. He came from Wythe County, Virginia. And from what I can gather from him, most of his family moved to Iowa. Do we have anyone related to the Burkharts? Yes? Do you agree with what I said? There's still Burkharts. I just saw somebody the other day. Thomas Grimes. He was supposed to have been in that battle. In 1816, he built what still stands, a two-story house on Smithville Road. And at that time, he had over 200 acres. And in 1841, he was the highest taxpayer in the county of $15 a year. He was born in Virginia, as I said, and he married Nancy Woodward. They had 11 children, all born in Smithville. And he is buried in the Knights of Pythias Cemetery. Then came a William Anderson. He also purchased land in 1816. He married Mary Jane Ketcham. And then a Jonathan Lindley, and I can't find him. And I wonder if he's related to the Lindleys. That had a lot to do with IU. Same thing with Buskirk. We have Buskirk. So here are some names of the first families. I don't know if you can read them, but I'd love to know if you belong to any of these families. I find it absolutely. Updegraff was a name that Georgiana's great-grandparents, he was one of our cobblers in Smithville. The name, never hear it. He had 3 daughters. His legacy still is around. Utterbacks, I think, moved to Heltonville. So a lot of the names that were so prominent in the early 1800s, we just don't hear the name anymore. Who what? Updegraff, yes, that's Georgiana's aunt.
Warns.
Yes.
Warns.
There's a Sharpless name up here, and that's where this battle that was talked about was supposed to have been on their land. And a Mitch Finley, who was in Sanders. Do you know that name, Lois? So, in a Finley cemetery? Really? So, what we have in the museum are pictures like this. Lots of times we do not know who they are. But this one we know was a family called Whitworth. And he fought in the Civil War, and that's all we know. We love these pictures, though. So what I'm going to do now, and I've just picked out a few names that were prominent people in Smithville or that I thought their history was interesting. But I want you to, and I don't want to offend anybody that I've missed somebody, because in June, Curtis already picked up a lot of the names. So, so Thrasher, Peter Noble Cone, his nickname. Thrasher was born in 1779 in Pennsylvania, and he married Catherine Flora, but I don't know what her maiden name was. And they're buried in Harmony Cemetery, and they had 7 children. One, George Thrasher, became a prominent citizen in Smithville. He ended up being the agent of the Smithville Depot for the railroad, and he married, and he was born in Virginia in 1804. He's buried in Manabel. No, wait, I'm mixed up. George Thrasher is a son that went to Smithville. He did not have the depot. That was his son, Theodore. So George Thrasher had 8 children, and 6 remained in the Smithville area. His son, George P., I find this interesting, owned over 900 acres and sold to the railroad and stone quarries, and he married Amanda Holland. Then came along Theodore Thrasher in 1835, married Julia Ann Floyd. They had 4 daughters, and Julia died at the age of 34. Theodore never remarried and raised the girls himself. He was postmaster, he had a general store, and he was the agent of the Smithville Depot for the railroad for over 50 years. And when he retired, the railroad liked him so well, they said, "We'll continue paying you until you die." He died 6 months later. And this is one of his daughters. This is in our museum. And they had a 20th or 21st birthday party for her. And this is a list of the people who attended. And she asked them all to sign this pillow top. And then she went around and embroidered the top. So this is in our museum. I just adore this picture. So this next story kind of answers a little bit of one of my questions. So Hazlitt, I think would be how you say that. Barrett rode on horseback from Virginia to this area. He was 17 years old by himself. Think of the bravery. He had to face just the forest itself, the beast. In those days, roads were scarce. He only had Indian trails for guidance. And when he got here, he married a 15-year-old girl. Well, where'd he find her? That was my question. Where'd he find her? Where did he know where to go? So, and they raised a family and had 15 children. So they raised a farm 2 miles northeast of Smithville. And according to Monroe County history, he and his wife were very important to the Methodist Church in Harrodsburg in the 1850s. They're both, now listen to this part, gives me the ear-jeebies. My cousins will appreciate this. Both he and Elizabeth were buried in an old farm place in Smithville. The cemetery was turned into a pasture land, later destroyed when the housing addition was built. No stones were found in 1986 or probably 1950 something. The Barrett Cemetery was located across from the Lucas Cemetery in Smithville. Who lived across from the Lucas Cemetery? Our Aunt Rosemary. So she had built her house on top of this cemetery, and she knew it. Later years, she found it out. The farm was located in Ram Creek in the valley. The top of the hill above the farm is called Handy Ridge. And this is where they lived, but he chose to go up another hill to Lucas Lane and be buried. So this is not Hazlitt Barrett, but this is his son. I just wanted to see what a Barrett would look like. Okay, the Floyd family. We still had a few Floyds in Smithville area. John Floyd, we don't know where he was from. He was born in 1790. He lived to be 65, and he's buried in Mount Ebel. Wife unknown. He had 4 children. It's known that the 2 of them stayed in the area. How do they know this? One was lost in the Civil War. The Floyds came to America from Wales in 1650, and then the descendants came to Smithville. Some families settled in downtown Smithville, and others stayed at Mount Ebel. So Elizabeth Floyd, daughter of John and Julia Bradley Floyd, married Calvin Wisley. She died of TB, leaving 3 small children. And there's their tombstone. Calvin Wisley, we have 2 of his descendants or more in the room here. He was born in 1837, died in 1915. Isn't he a handsome, distinguished-looking fellow? He was born in Wythe. And how you say it? Wythe? Kurt? Wythe County, Wythe County. How do you say it? Wythe, Virginia. Wythe, okay. He migrated to Fairfax, and I thought I had saw sometime that his nephew Stephen Wisley came with him. When he married Mary Elizabeth Wisley, they had 3 children. Then he married Sarah Ann Floyd with an additional 6. His daughter Emma Edith married James David Harrell. They were parents of our Smithville 2nd grade teacher, Wilma Harrell Weimer. The Wisley family left a large family legacy in the Creek Township. If you were to pick a large family name, who would you pick? Waterford? That's one of them. Kinser? Deckard? Pardon me? Richardson? Although Richardson started in Unionville. Meadows? Chambers? Young? Mitchell? So I think, as we're going through this, Mitchell and Deckard are going to be the largest families in Smithville area. So Joseph Harrell was born in Virginia 1826, and he moved with his parents to Monroe County in 1830. So he married Jane Adams in 1862. She was born in South Carolina. They're both buried at Smithville. He was a section boss of the railroad for 8 years. They had 4 children. Their son, J.P. Harrell, was a farmer in Smithville. Their grandson, Edward, was a veteran. I'm picking one out because I'm trying to prove something. Grandson, Edward, was a veteran of World War I and foreman of Monon. This is James David Harrell. And he is the father of our second grade teacher, Wilma Weimer. She, her husband, and 2 daughters all graduated from Smithville. Michael Wisley was born in Wythe County, Virginia, and he's now buried at Mount Abel. He married Sarah Coley from Wythe County. She was born in 1839 and is buried in Mount Abel. Michael and Sarah had one son, Stephen Floyd Wisley, and he's the one I thought came with Calvin first to this area. He married Desi Butcher. Butcher's another large population. And Stephen is the father of 12 children. 3 died in infancy, all still remaining in Smithville. Then we have the Chambers. Does anybody know about this cemetery? Of course you do. It's at Eagle Point, right on the fairway. So the first David Chambers was born in Kentucky. He's buried at the Chambers Cemetery at the Point. He married Sarah Sally Meadows in Kentucky. She's also buried there. They had 13 children. 3 of the children ended up outside of Indiana. It is recorded David Chambers was involved in the founding of Bloomington and one of the first members of the grand jury. David was a soldier in 1812. Where the cemetery sits was once Thomas Harrell's farm. Lucas, Solomon Lucas, married Mary Grimes. He was a significant landowner. The whole Lucas Cemetery and that whole strip of land was his. We have direct descendants still living in the Smithville area. His son, Earl Lucas Sr., his father was Elah Lucas, but Earl Lucas was a veteran of World War II and a highly decorated soldier. I just read his story. It's amazing. As a private, he was honored with the Silver Star and the Purple Heart only because he didn't obey orders. And he was at the Battle of Bulge. He decided to stay put and fight. There's his stone. And this is what the map of Lucas Lane. Grimes. So Thomas Grimes was supposed to have been fought in the battle on Cedar Bluff. He came here after he had already bought land in Washington County. And so then they moved to Smithville. They had 11 children. 8 lived to adulthood. He was one of the early landowners, and he's the one who had the highest taxpayers that I mentioned. His youngest son, Silas Grimes, was born in Smithville in the farm there on Smithville Road. He married Susan Gaither. He served in the Civil War. This is the farmhouse that sits on Smithville Road. Pardon me? It's Bartlett's Farm. Yes, ma'am. This is Silas Grimes. He was, I think, next to the youngest of the children. Then, so I found this in the Indianapolis newspaper when he passed away. And I'll show you here in a second. So they had 7 children. 6 of them moved to Iowa and 1 to Illinois. Only 1 child, that should be 5, I think. 1 child, Annabelle, stayed here. They're both buried in Rose Hill. And then he put up the property for sale in the 1920s and moved to Bloomington. So this is his. He must have kept a diary. That's the only thing I can think of. So while a student at IU, he enlisted the service of the state. He entered the military service as first lieutenant because he was in the ROTC program. He was with the Company G, 31st Volunteer Infantry, and he entered in 1861. He was promoted to captain, then to major, and he then commissioned out in 1865. This that follows is every battle, occupation, liberation that he was involved in. He had to have kept a calendar, a diary or something. So Grimes Lane here in Bloomington was named after him. He continued to live on the Grimes farm and decided to sell in 1927, and he also was a sheriff of Monroe County. The Deckard family. Now, there are disputes over some of Reverend Johan's life, so I decided to cut it out, and I'm going to talk about Jacob. But there is on Fairfax Road, it's before you get to Scott Lane as you're going toward the lake. You can't see it from the road, but there's what's called the Deckard Tomb Cemetery. And so Reverend Johannes Deckard is buried there. His first wife he married was Mary Elizabeth Vance. She's also buried there. His second wife was Mary Elizabeth Pearson, and she's buried in Guthrie. They had one child. The Deckard genealogy is a must-read. So in the museum, this is at a point in time, a Deckard reunion. And the Deckard family, this one, under this beautiful tree, when I first saw it, I thought it was the Bartlett farm. But I was told by a descendant that it's Ramp Creek that's underwater right now. So every wedding, they said, that took place was under this tree. This is a huge family. So Jacob Deckard is the son of Reverend Johannes. He was born in Smithville, Virginia, and he's buried at Smithville. He married Sally Hillenberg in 1817 in Virginia. They had 7 children. After Sally's death, he married Jemima Etter. And I'm going to get to why I'm picking out another family member. So Jemima Etter Deckard is from Virginia. She died at age 81, is buried in Smithville. Then they had a son, Felty Valentine Deckard. I love the names that I come across. I love them. He was born in Smithville in 1830. He's buried at Smithville. When he died, he was one of the oldest native residents living at that time. He was the father of 11 children, 9 sons, 2 daughters. 9 sons, now you know why the name keeps carrying on. Let's see. Most of the family remained in the area. So out of the son, Andrew Alexander Deckard, he married Emma Ethel Thrasher, who is one of the daughters of Theodore Thrasher, who became our 4th grade teacher, and there she is. And she was very much involved in helping Smithville Museum get started. She had tons of pictures. And there's a picture of what the Deckard tomb looks like. And there's another picture, kind of looks like a mound over the tomb. And I love this handwriting. My dad would write like this. It's just beautiful handwriting. And our great-grandmother was Adeline Deckard Hill, and she married Nathan Hill, our great-great-grandfather. So then there's the Mitchell family. Isaac Mitchell was born in North Carolina, where the area was sparsely settled. In 1807, he married Celia Harrell. They migrated to Lawrence County in the fall of 1817, along with his parents, Abraham and Lucy Wilson Mitchell, along with his siblings. And he's buried in the Tanksley Cemetery. And we had a Tanksley that was a cobbler in downtown Smithville. Most of Isaac's children moved to Greene County. except for their son, Isaac Mitchell. Isaac was born in Lawrence County, and he's buried in Mount Albel. Isaac married Phoebe Ellen Chambers. They had one daughter and 10 sons. Most of the children remained in the Smithville area and are buried in Mount Albel. Their daughter, Cora Vandella Mitchell, married Charles Wesley Bodkin. They lived near the Smithville School. Their son, Alva, graduated from Smithville High School and in later years became the principal of both the high school and elementary. I was scared to death of him in first grade. Every time he'd walk in the room, I'd cry. Their son, Oscar, gave land for the Phillips Vive grade school that was near Lake Monroe, and Lake Monroe Dam. The school burned and he got the land back. And there is a picture of Georgiana's great-great-grandfather. And then this is just his obituary. Then, and if you know where the Smithville Christian Church is, behind that there's, of course now there's some kind of business there or something. There used to be a nice farmhouse set there. That was Dr. Granville Bennett. He was born in Carolina, but he also came from Clark County here. So he had to have arrived here before 1850 because he died at the age of 40 in 1854, leaving 4 sons and a daughter. He married Permelia Jane Jacobs, and she died in 1872 at age 49. The children, I'm assuming, would have been adults by this time. So Dr. Bennett was the younger brother of Mansfield Bennett, who is the co-founder of Smithville. Dr. Bennett's family is all buried in Lucas. Mansfield Bennett created his own cemetery called the Bennett Humphrey for his family. It's just right outside Smithville. And I just saw it for the first time now that the leaves are off. And you can see it from, it's right across from the Bartlett farm. And it's surrounded by a picket fence. Yes, absolutely. Their son, Albert Franklin, they called AF. And he was born in Clark County in 1848. That's where I got that they stopped there first. And all his schooling was at home. He bought Dr. John Waring's business in 1877. And he married Isabel Bell Gaither in 1879, who he'd known since childhood, and they attended the Methodist church there. They had 6 children. John, Miller, and George were born in Smithville, and they moved to Lafayette to become employees of the Monon. Their daughter, Mary, lived to be 21. She died of TB, and she saved all the old Smithville newspapers, which I'll talk about shortly, and were donated to the Smithville area by Martha and Bill Fox, who is related to them. Thank you, Martha. Their youngest son, Joseph, became a well-known photographer for the Monon, and he married Amy Fox, Martha's Aunt Amy. And they're buried in Lucas Cemetery. And this is the farmhouse. And this is a picture that Joe Bennett had taken of Tom Harrell along with Mrs. Bennett in her elder years. I love this picture. Then he also took a picture. This is on Gore Road, and you can see the Monon traveling down. I don't know if you can see it where y'all. It's here in the background. So the Monon is traveling behind the houses there. Cool pictures. And this is the Bennett Humphrey Cemetery, and it's sweet. So Mansfield Bennett, as I said, came from North Carolina. He married Elizabeth James in North Carolina. They came to Smithville, again, had to be prior to 1851 when he and George Smith established Smithville. And I talk about the family plot. So George Smith, I can't find anything on him. Don't know where he's buried. I've looked everywhere. But we do know that he probably was one of the first store owners, like I said, and he was a blacksmith. Um, Now, in the museum, which we have a copy of, is he, in his story, had people to sign a petition when they came in, and they think it was to get everybody to agree that the Smithville be named after him. And so Julia's comment was, that's kind of odd to, to, to go about it. Leonard, William Leonard was born in 1817 in Paoli. His parents came from North Carolina. His first wife was Lucinda Grimes. They had 13 children, including Dr. John Leonard. Lucinda died at age 81 and is buried in Smithville. Mr. Leonard's second wife is Nancy Melissa Guy. She died in 1917 and buried there. They had no children. 12 of the 13, here again, I find this, as Julia says, odd. 13 children, one stayed in Smithville. When the parents died, because I looked at the dates, I was curious, why would they do this? They all moved to Oregon. Adult children all moved to Oregon. He also established a little housing addition right there across from the church, and it was called at that time Leonard Grove. And he was a school teacher for a small time. So Dr. John Leonard was born there in Smithville in 1843, and their house is right across from the church, and it still exists. And he married a Louisa Eliza Stark, and they had 2 daughters, and he died in 1900 at the age of 56. A lot of these doctors died very, very young. And in the museum, we have his, this is the marriage license for, I think this one is Dr. Leonard when he married Stark. And this is the tombstone. This is the house, still stands. And I imagine this is where they also saw patients, because it looks like it's got 2 front doors to it. And this is the marriage license to somebody, one of the Leonards. And then this is his physician's license. We have those. And Phillips, and I did this in honor of Joe. William Green Phillips was born in Virginia in 1804, was the oldest living man in Monroe County in 1904, and he died in his home in Harrodsburg. He migrated to this area around 1829. He outlived 2 wives. He was the father of 10 children. He also had 10 siblings that also migrated to this area. And a lot of the Phillips are born in, buried in Mount Abel, and one is married to a Young, related to me. And this is Mr. Phillips. Yay! You're better looking, Joe. Tatum, Jewett Tatum, has a farm across from Sanders School, and it is said to be the oldest farm in Monroe County. It still exists. It was built in 1821 and was staked on a land of 124 acres. And they were so behind in surveying, he didn't get his deed to the property until 6 years later. And this is a picture of the Tatum house. And this is John Tatum. John Trissler. Anybody related to Trisslers? Trisslers is another name. So John Trissler was born in 1805 in Kentucky, and he's buried in Bedford, and he married Sarah Ann Wagamon. They had 7 children. The Trisslers moved to Indiana in 1833, and most of Sally's family moved north. They moved back to Kentucky after a couple years, but then returned back and settled near Smithville. She died at age 47. Their youngest child, John H. Trissler, served in the Civil War. He died of typhoid fever in 1862. Let's see. His second wife was Emmeline Enzie, and she died 5 years later. And then his third wife was Mrs. Jane Thornburg, and she's buried in, if she was from Bedford. They had 2 more children, And then he had a fourth wife, and they had, she already had 2 children. John worked in the limestone quarries and passed away in 1882, and he's buried in Bedford. And we found this in the museum. This is the Jonathan Trissler Bible. Uh-oh. Oh. And this is a picture of the Trissler families. So the Trissler family, let's see, they had a son, Joshua, who married Margaret Sylvester. He was a farmer and sawmill owner. He's buried at Rose Hill. They had 4 children remained in Smithville. And their daughter Ella, see, it all comes back for a circle. Their only daughter Ella married the local shoe cobbler Billy Updegraff. They were proud, and then the Updegraffs were proud parents of 3 daughters, Anna Updegraff Carmichael, who became a teacher at Smithville and was a favorite among a lot of students, and she graduated from Smithville in 1915. Then Jonathan married Eliza Sylvester. Jonathan was the foreman of the railroad, lost 2 fingers on uncoupling cars. He's buried at Smithville, and he had 2 sons, Richard Paris and Horsley Greeley. I love these names. So out of Richard Paris, we get our first grade teacher, which was Mary Trissler Martin. She and her husband, Jack, had no children. And this is your grandmother. Which one's your grandmother? We're not sure which is Georgiana's great-grandmother, but don't you love that picture? And this is a picture of Richard Paris Trissler. I think he's holding the buggy, and that's his dad in the seat. William Ross. This is a fun story. I wrote this story in one of our newsletters, and I'm just going to condense this down. William Ross came from North Carolina, and it's verified by the Indiana Magazine of History. And he's buried at Mount Salem. Has anybody ever been to the Mount Salem Cemetery? It is the sweetest cemetery. Anyway, he lived to be 116 years old. And he lived 4 miles from Smithville and walked there every day. And he was quite the hunter and carried, it tells in here what his rifle was made out of. And it was something about the Adams Stone Quarry where he had his smithy shop there. And this is his tombstone in Mount Salem. Let's see. This talks about his, and everything goes around. So he had a clock that he made himself, and it was sold at an auction to J.M. Bennett, who was a distant relative, Martha, and somehow the son, William Wilson, got the clock back, and he became a merchant in Smithville in 1830. So, but all prior to 1850, these were the people who made up Smithville. The settlers and pioneers came to this area. My question still is when, why, and how. But we found a lot of them came by cart and horseback. And I have to say, these people did not sit still. They were workers. They came up with things to do. They survived. They were hardworking people. And then Smithville had a newspaper. And so who was that editor? It was Ralph B. Carter. And Michael says it's no relation, but we'll see. So Ralph Carter was born in 1876 there in Smithville. His father was Wilford Carter, and they owned a grocery store. In 1895, when Wilford died, Ralph was only 20. And so he took over his father's newspaper at that time, which was called Name It and Take It. Soon Ralph became interested in newfangled things like the telephone. In addition to the printing press, he added a switchboard to the store, but sold the building and its stocks of groceries to Robert Taylor. And then it burned, and everything in it burned but the switchboard. So the loss of the printing press interrupted the availability of the newspaper for just a bit. And this is a picture of Ralph Carter. So Ralph Carter was also well known here in Bloomington. He married Alma Ross, who was the son of Wilson Ross, the Smithville merchant. He was in charge of Monroe County's telephone lines that encompassed the entire south portion of Monroe County. And Ralph again began publishing the Smithville newspaper, and he renamed it the Smithville News. But telephones and newspapers weren't Ralph's only interest. He built a pike. He played the clarinet in Smithville's band. And in 1913, with the assistance of Homer Eads and Silas Cisco, he repaired the leaky dome of the nearly new Monroe County Courthouse. He was also considered the high chief operator of the town clock. And when he died, they said the time never kept accurate after that. So he was the principal owner of Citizens Telephone Company in Ellisville. He moved his family to Bloomington. That same year, at the age of 42, he was required to register for the draft in World War II and fell ill and died. Now, also, Ralph begot a son named Robert, and Robert married another favorite teacher named Mildred Fewell Carter. And this is what the newspaper looked like. So I need to insert here that Martha found that her Aunt Mary Bennett saved tons of these newspapers. So Martha and her brother gave them to Smithville Museum. Smithville went to IU Archives. They bound they kept the originals, and they bound in a hardback book for us. I was going to bring it today, but it's just too heavy, of all the newspapers that we got. I love this book. And someone made a timeline of Smithville. See how worn this is? Made a timeline of Smithville, and it's on the Monroe County History, or the library, might be the library. And it's taken bits and pieces out of these newspapers, and it tells you the story of everyone in Smithville. It's just absolutely amazing. The second time I read through this, I thought, well, who did they marry? Well, who are they? Who do they belong to? I researched every single name on here, and I found who belongs to who. And it's amazing. Loved it. It's fun. It's a fun read. Yes, ma'am. Sir. Just a second. I think it's like 19. It's like I don't know. But from the pieces that we've got, it looks like 1920 might have been the last time we had any. So it was like 1880 to 1920. Okay, and this is what Mrs. Carter looked like. She taught high school, and then I had her in 6th grade. She was amazing. So Smithville Telephone. The telegraph was brought to Smithville in 1888. And 11 years later, the telephone service was established by Ralph Carter. The first Smithville Telephone Exchange was started by J.K. Johnson in 1922. Johnson developed a communication system across Monroe County, networking the county's flourishing limestone quarries. The second exchange was Clear Creek, and then came Ellisville. In 1933, the company was purchased by Guy A. and Edna Draper, who operated the company until Mr. Draper died in a car wreck in 1942. Their son, Byron Draper, assumed responsibilities of running the company and expanded it throughout 14 counties in southern and central Indiana. During this 20-year span, home phones in Smithville were operated through a switchboard located in a 2-story brick building north of the corner grocer, or where the War Memorial sits. If you're looking at the War Memorial going north, right on that corner was this 2-story. And I lived on the other side of it by 2 houses. So I remember it well, the brick building, not Smithville Telephone. So it was on the corner of Smithville Road and Strain Ridge. The building stood for many years and served as a home for the operator, as well as exchange and the newspaper. And in my lifetime, it served as apartments and a motorcycle club and some other things. So up to the late 1950s, the switchboard was run by Roy Fiddler, who was a polio survivor, and his wife Barbara. And we all remember them very, very well. And so it just goes on and talks about in the 50s, the candlestick was replaced with a large, bulky black plastic phone with a rotary. You know, if the phone, if you had the crank type, everybody had a signal, too short or long, whatever. So my sister had written this, and so here's how she described when the news came to our home, although I don't remember it, but when it came to our home that Smithville was going to go away. The Drapers decided to move the headquarters to Ellisville. As the firm negotiated with our hometown folk, which I find interesting that they did that, it was agreed that Smithville would remain with the company's name permanently. I remember the distress in our house during those dark days when Smithville moved to Ellisville, home of our biggest basketball challenger. Oh, the sorrow, the horror of it all. Moved the Eagles' homeland, leaving the safety of Skibo land. It was a disaster and it was sad. That was my sister's statement. And this is a picture of men on the pole. And this is the building, the two-story there. That's where Smithville Telephone began. And look at the car in the front there. And so then we have the Warrings, which we all know, and I'll go real through this really quickly. A doctor, again, John Morris Waring, came here in 1848, and he had the families, and developed out of that family another favorite teacher we had, who was our home ec teacher. And she was also a Smithville graduate, and this is their home, and it still stands. Then Dr. Carl Stewart. Does anybody know Dr. Carl Stewart? He is a graduate of Smithville, and he grew up in Fairfax. He has a very wonderful history, and he is in the Monroe County Hall of Fame as of 1997. He was all about education, and he was in World War II. He was in the invasion of Okinawa and Normandy. And he built Starlight Drive-In. And this is what his home place looked like in Fairfax, which is, I think, might be, I don't think it's still standing. Yeah, and there's the Starlight King. Okay, New Albany and Salem Railroad. This is where we start into, I am really going, should I stop some and get into the school? What do you want me to do? Okay, yeah, so let me just be real quick about the railroad. As they were building the railroad, they discovered stone. And so the stone was just popping up near the tracks. And before long, they started doing sawmills, gang mills to block cube all the stones. So business was booming. And this is the history of the Monon, which doesn't come into play until in the 40s. And these are just pictures we have. We have some highlights that people were crossing this is right in front of Red Man Hall. There's the depot right down the middle of town. I don't know how the people slept at night. And dirty. And there's the Red Man Hall. There's a train picture. There's a train that fell off the tracks. There's the what we call it, schedule for the Monon. And this is in Harrodsburg crossing Clear Creek. There's another picture, more. And then came Limestone. So the first quarry was Samuel Judah. And Smithville and Sanders had lots of quarries, and we think that there are a lot of places where they just tried to quarry and just left the hole. We have one on Lucas Lane that's that way. There's a copy of a quarry. And I think this is our Grandpa Hill here, right there. And then the story of John Crafton, I'll tell you quickly. He grew up in Ram Creek, and he was considered the Stone King. He started at work. He and his brothers, the parents died when they were really young, so they had to take care of themselves. And he started to work on the Monon, and he developed a telegraph for the Monon. And so he was lost at sea on the Titanic. And the relatives still are part of Smithville. And what happened is he got homesick, and he traded the ticket with a mother and daughter, and he wanted to get home, so he traded. He was on the Titanic. And before he left, he created a rose granite monument in Rose Hill, and on it just says, "Lost on the Titanic." There's the memorial. And I wrote about it in a newsletter. Okay, then my Uncle Lou wrote about the legend of Indiana limestone. This is his bio. He had the Lou Hill monuments. And then this is Larry Grubb. He was a stone carver. He was part of the Delaware thing. And these are the businesses that were in Smithville. We had 2 hotels, all kinds of restaurants, 2 saloons. We had a drugstore that moved to Bloomington. This is one of the hotels. That was a newer post office. They had 2 bands. These were the businessmen of town. And the doctors, I would like to say real quick, we had a lot of doctors, but up till 1850, I think their care of people was different. And after the railroad and limestone came in place, they were dealing with different types of things, like suicide, and different diseases. So it was all different. So we had several doctors. And this was Dr. Waring. And these are the name of the doctors that we had in Harrodsburg. And this is Dr. Kentling, who had the first car in Smithville, and Loeb Waring, who had store. And there's the car, and Doc Mitchell. And I just had a person tell me he was delivered by Doc Mitchell. And I asked him, I said, "Did he name you?" And he said, "Not that I know of," because when I was asking people, "What are your memories of Doc Mitchell?" they said, "Well, he named us." He would tell the parents, "That name's wrong for this child." And so I'm going through here of this is our great-grandfather, Nathan Hill. He was in Civil War. He had so many injuries when he came back, he didn't live long. They lived on Paintown. And there are my grandpa, he's the second one to the left there. They had their own baseball team. So we had so many distinctions. I went through and made some stats there of all the distinguished people and the different awards people got. And World War II, we had, that I know of, that I was able to count, 204 soldiers, and 3 became a POW. And how many died? Where'd my 11 killed in action. And so I went through, this is for the book. I just think this is important for everybody to read. And then if you allow me, there is, and that's Curtis's brother. And he gave that gift to my mother when they were in high school. And there were the Humphrey family had 6 sons, 1 died. The Linthicum family had 7 sons. They all survived. The Humphrey, Clark, and Hayes family all lived within a mile of each other in the heart of Smithville, and they all lost a son. And this is Sharon Waterford's dad, and Sharon Waterford and Mr. Casey. And this is Lou Hill, my Uncle Jim. And he wrote a letter to my parents because he was witnessing the end of the war when he was on the ship. And he words this so beautifully. Wish we had time to read it. And there's Carl Stewart. And then we went through the Korean. So there are 17 fellows on our thing. So very quickly, in Smithville, we had 8 grade schools located all over Clear Creek Township. And then the townspeople in Smithville before 1910 got together and said, we've got to have our own high school, because kids were going to Bloomington or living in Bloomington didn't get to come back home because they wanted to continue school. So they had George Gaither, who Kurt tells me is related to the Gaither gospel family. He was a contractor, and he built the Red Man, and then he built the Smithville School. I'll show you a picture in a second. And it was just a little white building, and then a couple years later, he put on these massive wings, and it burned in 1936. But this is the gym, because in 1910, the boys were starting to play basketball, and they had no place to play. But other schools by that time already had indoor facilities. So the townspeople got together again and said, we can't allow this. So they contributed money, they contributed lumber, and George Gaither built what's considered the barn. And so it remained. It got improved over the years, but it remained until 1961. We all remember it fondly. And this is one of the grade schools we had. Smithville lasted from 1910 to 1972. The first graduate was Maud Harrell. And then in 1960, we always had hanging over our heads that we were going to lose our school. And so the trustee at the time, Ben Giles, and some townspeople decided we'd build a new gym. This is what they had in 1910 and 1912. This is a majestic school, just amazing. And that's Maud Harrell. Leo Litz became a reporter for the war. These are just different pictures of the schools. And this is what the new addition to the school looked like. And in a 13-year period, we had 15 sets of twins. And this is Denise. And then we had athletics. And we had a storied, although nobody knows it, and I think it should be put in the Hall of Fame at Monroe County, because they tried and they won. And the coaches we had came here, built up the teams, and left and went on to greater things, like Case Everett, John Adams, and there's another picture of the barn. First cheerleaders, this is Janie, Five Coats' mother on the left. And there's the inside of what the old gym looked like. And so when the school closed, we made the newspaper quite a bit. Love these pictures. There's my mother over on the right, my dad, number 6. I've got to get to the Skibo question. This is the inside of the new gym. The beams we had came from Oregon. There's Irita. See yourself, Irita? And we love these girls, the Bel Airs. Then we had John McLeod. And this is a story of Mr. Inman, who was a great wrestler, became very distinction honored at IU. Could not go to the Olympics because he didn't have any money. So I put some of the notables here. And I just was told by my cousin that Earl Chambers is now in the Hall of Fame. Wonderful. He graduated from Smithville. So in 1924, the boys won tri-state in Cincinnati. They played Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. And within 32 hours, they won 6 games, and they took the championship. And in 1991, Bob Hamill wrote up about it. So this is where I think we should be in the Hall of Fame. So in 1944, at Nashville, my Uncle Lou was number 44. He scored 44 points. Nobody had ever done that before. And it was put in the window of the newspaper. So he set a record. Then came along 1960, Larry Perry, who the newspaper named the Smithville Sensation. 1 week he scored 37, and a few weeks later he scored 47. and he broke a record in one of the sectionals with high points. Then within no time came along John Richardson, and he scored. They played Fayetteville, and the score was 68-61. Smithville lost. Johnny Bob made 51 of those points. And then I was told by Don Skirvin that Norm Richardson broke Johnny Bob's record in 1966. So I think we should honor everybody, all the small schools, and be in the Hall of Fame. That's my thought. In 1964, Coach John McLeod was our coach for 2 years. And there's the year my Uncle Lou, he's in the back with number 44. There's Larry Perry, Smithville sensation. There's Johnny Bob. And then there's Coach McLeod. Okay. What is a skibo? Anybody know? So I asked a lot of people. I even asked Kurt. But I found the first mention of the word skibo was in a Searchlight in 1938, our yearbook. Found that. Kurt told me he thought that they needed a mascot to set in the middle of the school, and it had to start with an S. And so somebody looked up and found the word skibo, and that was a penguin. The name was proposed and accepted. I'm paraphrasing Kurt. But Kurt says he remembers Sammy Skibo standing proudly against bears, lions, panthers, tigers, and eagles. So my dad told me that Coach Quackenbush came up with the name Skibo. Some else told me that my Uncle Frank Hill came up with the name in the 20s. So we were told that a skibo is a rare bird or a penguin. Sammy Skibo even hit the newspaper in Bloomington by Bill Dyer. I think this was in '51. And he says, our attempt to learn where the name Skibos originated has net us many answers, none of which are satisfactory. And now we've gotten into a controversy how to pronounce it. Is it Skibos or Skiboos? And so I'll answer that in a minute. So this is a painting that's in our current school of what the students painted 4 large murals in our Skibo room in 1960. And they still exist. They're deteriorating, but they're there. And I have a story real quick. So Skibos. So other people were saying, oh, I named them, and I named them, and I named them. But then Harry Smith was the principal in '51. And this was put in the newspaper. And what does he say? That the former coach named Quackenbush was searching for an uncommon bird or animal, and the name Skibos came up, which is the rarest of birds and a member of the penguin family. So, is that it? Don't know. I also found that Mishawaka in the 1930s had a semi-pro baseball game that was called baseball team that's called Skibos. So my Aunt Rosemary responded to Mike Leonard, and she said, even though we do not have a high school, we are still proud of our past Skibos. All the players that played for Skibos sure brought a lot of joy to our fans. So then the Renaissance started, so I'll whiz through here just so you can get a look of all the hard work. We have a historical park, and this is one house that my stepdad bought, and it was the Wampler home. And beside it is the historical park of all the families that wanted a bench put in there. And this is Red Man. It was just a shell, and it got remodeled to its glory today. I have to show you the last picture. So these are events that we have at Smithville. Dr. Frank bought them up, donated back. This is inside the museum. We lost all of our trophies and most of our senior pictures, but we found some in ditches. Lake Monroe, I remember it being created like it was yesterday. And we knew where all the lovers' lanes were. People used them. We would go what's called bushwhacking and finding them. So this is Allen's Creek, where they had to move all the monuments that were uncovered. These are the covered bridges that are underwater. This is the old-time basketball. We still have alumni banquets. 53 years later, by the grace of God. This is the 1973 class that woulda, shoulda, coulda been. 1 year went to Bloomington. And this is Janie's Five Coats' mother, our oldest living alum. She went to the alumni banquet last year. So the murals were replicated and put into the community center. We hired Adam Long to do it, and he did a fantastic job. And we also replaced our trophy case. So we took things from the museum and put here. Isn't that trophy case beautiful? And there's Kurt, and this is what the murals looked like when they were first painted in 1961. And this is my parents that were, well, my stepdad and my mom worked hard at Smithville. And there I am, so proud of our new Skibo murals. And a Wisley family gave us money, and we had a stone Sammy Skibo created right there. So, any questions? Thank you for your time.